I actually didn't know about Paralympic sport until London 2012. So although I was born with a disability, I didn't actually know that disability sport was a thing.
We have been graced with greatness tonight.
This Games is definitely a legacy.
London 2012, I watched Ellie Simmons, and that kind of really got me kind of thinking about it.
I think London was a turning point, and since then it's just been getting bigger and bigger.
London didn't just raise the bar in the field of play. London did raise the bar in the imagination of society.
Through sport, Paralympic GB has just made disability more acceptable, really, and more the norm.
A week after winning 3 golds for Great Britain, I was left on a train without a ramp. And that is a reality check in terms of what living with a disability in the UK is actually like.
The possibilities of who I could be are open when I'm walking around. When I'm in a chair, those possibilities are narrowed by the other person. And that's still the case.
I pretty much know that whenever I go out, I'm going to face a problem being a disabled person, and we shouldn't. That's not okay. We're in 2022, you know, everybody should be equal, and unfortunately it's not.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on sports diplomacy. My name is Gabby Pirro, and I head up events and delegations for the Pacific Council. For those of you who may have joined late and missed the intro video, we're going to add it in the chat so you can view it later on. In anticipation of the 2024 Paralympic Games, which is just 98 days away on August 28th, and the 2028 Paralympic Games in LA, we're delighted to have you all join us for an enlightening discussion about the history of the Paralympic movement, its significance for athletes, the essence of inclusion, and the preparations needed of the cities set to host these prestigious games. Joining us today are 2 distinguished speakers who bring unique perspective and firsthand experiences in the evolution of the Paralympic Games. They both have competed as Paralympians and are both current advocates for future games and athletes. First, I'd like to welcome David Clarke, the CEO of the British Paralympic Association and ex-international footballer for Great Britain and England's blind football team. He and his team have been diligently working on best prepared for the Paralympic athletes in advance of the upcoming Paris Games, and will be sharing his experience in these efforts here today. Our second speaker is Candace Cable, an American 9-time celebrated Paralympian and human rights advocate whose contributions to wheelchair racing and her advocacy for disabled rights have made a significant impact both on and off the field. And moderating today's session is Mr. John Moffet, a 2-time U.S. Olympic swimming team member, world record holder in 100-meter breaststroke and 400 medley relay. He's a 3-time Emmy Award-winning producer, and he's VP of the U.S. Olympians and Paralympians Association. As always, following our panel discussion, we will have a Q&A session. We encourage you to please submit your questions in the chat function, which we will have turned on right now. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. John Moffet.
Gabby, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And let me take just a quick personal moment to say what an honor it is to be here today. Candace and I have worked together for many years, and we've done a lot of projects here in Los Angeles. And David, I'm very much looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better in the next hour. So with that, let's get going. David, you first. We just saw the video of how the London Paralympic Games created really a quantum shift in the Paralympic movement. As someone who was there, describe your experiences and why they were so monumental.
Yeah, thank you, John, and hello to everybody, and great to be with Candace again. I had the pleasure of Candace's company when I was out in LA back in October, so great to be with you again and hearing your voice again. I remember the very first day of the Paralympics in London. I was sat on my balcony on the 7th floor of one of the blocks, and the previous Paralympics I've been to, 2008, 1996 in Atlanta and Beijing respectively, there was no sense of kind of opening. There was a few people came along. In London 2012, the park opened and 250,000 people came into the park. And this was after an 80,000 sellout for the opening ceremony. And I still believe to this day that there was such a big thing about the Olympics and the Paralympics in London and all the new venues and all the new developments. And the Olympics was quite an expensive thing to be involved in. And I think a lot of people just wanted to be part of this big event. But what happened was 250,000 people came in every day to look at the park and look at the venues. And they found this incredible thing. They found Paralympic sport. They found elite sport with disabled people operating at the top of their game. And for me, London was that turning point with real parity, real integration, Olympics and Paralympics taken as equals, right throughout the organizing committee. And I think the journey of Paralympic sport has been one from what I would describe as sympathy and empathy, through to acceptance, through to enjoyment, and now to consuming, where fans of Paralympic sport, and I would say particularly here in the UK, are absolutely happy to pay money to come and see elite performances and think of it as sport. So for me, that catalyst was the way in which the whole event was presented in London 2012. But just finally on this point, as the video shows, we cannot assume that accepting that a disabled person can operate at an elite level on the field of play in sport translates to the behaviors and attitudes towards disabled people in the rest of society. And Sophie Christian, multi-gold medal winning athlete at the end there, talks about what that means and the fact that you may be a multi-gold medal winning athlete, but if you can't get on a train to go to work, that makes things pretty difficult.
Yeah, wow, it's a great example of how all of us can up our awareness, especially as we go into Paris. Candace, I'm going to ask you to go back in time as well. I'll ask you to go back a little bit further in time, back to 1984. And you competed in what I believe was called the Paralympic exhibition race. It was held during the Los Angeles Olympics on the Coliseum floor around the track. I also want you to describe your personal experience with that, and of course, the significance of this first transformative moment.
Thank you, John. And thank you, David. It's really great to be here with both of you. And also thank you to the Pacific Council for having us and giving us this opportunity. I hope this becomes a series that from Paris 2024 to LA 28, we're continuing to build on this knowledge base and looking for ways that we can all contribute to this change that David talked about. You know, one of the things about inclusion is making sure that everybody is able to participate. And so audio descriptions oftentimes are a part of any kind of visual presentations. And so I just wanted to do a quick audio description of myself. I'm a white woman turning 70 this year. I have short blonde and silver and brown hair about chin length, and I'm wearing black rim glasses and a black turtleneck, and my background is blurred. And knowing those kind of things is, you know, how we make opportunities to make sure that everyone's included. And here we're talking about disability. And then on just one other point before I answer your question, John, okay. I really love the progress that David articulated about sympathy to empathy to accepting to enjoyment to consuming. And I want to add a little piece to that one. I want to add to systemic change, that we create a real systemic change, because sport has that power in massive ways. And it is not just sport entertainment, but it's also an opportunity to create a societal shift. And what David talked about in London was a visceral societal shift. I was there reporting and writing about it. And as I think back to 1984 and my, you know, my participation in those Olympic Games in an exhibition event, The reason we had the exhibition event was because the organizers of the LA 84 Olympic Games thought that putting on the Paralympic Games would be costly, and they didn't want to go in that direction. And Juan Antonio Samaranch, who was the president of the International Olympic Committee at the time, was also a champion of disabled sports. And so this is how I understand the story goes, is that he wanted something to happen. And the exhibition event was what was brought forth, a 1,500 meters on the track for men racing in wheelchairs and an 800 meters on the track for women racing in wheelchairs. And I scored a spot. We had to compete before the games, and this was a final event. And this was the very first time that anyone really, I think, with a disability was being seen on such a large stage. There were 90,000 people in the Coliseum that day. This was an international broadcast. They did an up close and personal on me, which was, the thing of the day that they did about athletes, right? The up close and personals. So it was a really big moment. We had an article in People magazine. It was a massive moment, a paradigm shift for folks with disabilities and folks that interact with folks with disabilities. And before that, I mean, we still did not have the Americans with Disabilities Act. That didn't come forward till 1990. So we still didn't have our own Civil Rights Act, a law that protect us. And, in that law, one of the things about that law is that just before Congress signed it into law, they exempted themselves from it. Isn't that fascinating? It tells you about the mentality of exclusion of disabled people, not just in this country, in the United States, but globally, how we've been excluded, but actually put out of vision in a major way. And so 1984 was this, boom, we are here. Look at us. And it was sport. And we know not all disabled people participate in sport, but it was a defining paradigm shift for not only Paralympic sport, but also for people with disabilities to be able to see themselves as viable, capable people in a world that has told them they are not. And I know many people, I've met many people since in 1984 day that were in the hospital after their spinal cord injury. And they said, that changed my life. And myself, I wasn't an athlete before my spinal cord injury in 1975 at the age of 21. So sports also changed my life and gave me purpose. So thank you so much for that question.
Well, of course, and we all understand as athletes how transformative sports can be and how powerful it can be for a positive impact on society at large.
Absolutely.
David, I'd like to have you for a moment just define what para stands for in Paralympics.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? That this is parallel. So it's really critical that, these days we have an agreement that the Paralympic Games happens in the same city as the Olympic Games. But this is nothing to do with paraplegic, or it's parallel.
Great, thank you. That's important. I think a lot of people are under the misconception of what the actual definition is. It's something else that we need to define for anybody who is familiar with Paralympic sports is the Paralympic classification system. Candace, if you could help us, needless to say, it can be confusing, especially for those that are new to the Paralympic, new to Paralympic competition. Please give us a brief overview, and as simply as possible, of how athletes are classified in order to have fair competition.
Oh, thanks, John. So yes, classification. And David said in a meeting that we had, and that I'm going to reiterate on multiple occasions, I think, for the rest of my life, is that there would be no Paralympic sport without classification. Because we really do need to be able to create these different categories, and also for people to understand that it's not a static thing. Classification is not a static thing, and it continues to evolve. David was just telling us recently that the new classification code was just approved on Friday for the Paralympic sport. And that's another shift and another level up for folks within sport. And the concept of classification, I think sometimes can be quite confusing. And there's a visual called the lexicon that I saw for the very first time when I went to London to report on the games, that I thought was a really simple way to explain a complicated thing. And one of the things about disability, and folks living with disability understand, is that oftentimes we get told that disability is so complicated, we don't know what to do with it. What do we, like, oh gosh, where do we start? Let's take baby steps. And it's like, yes, we understand that, but we don't need to take baby steps. But we do want to help simplify some of the things for you. And classification, I think, is a place where people can really get lost down a rabbit hole. So just to keep it simple, the IPC has a classification code, and then all the different international federations have their own classification codes for their sports. So each sport has its own specifics that go with it. And then there are 10 different classifications within Paralympic sport. And they have to do with muscle power, different types of impairment. Also, they have to do with anything that has to do with movement, any kind of movements, involuntary or voluntary movements. We also have an intellectual impairment class that's a part of Paralympic sport. And oftentimes people don't think that folks with intellectual disabilities are a part of Paralympic sport, that they're only in Special Olympics, but that's not true. We have had in cross-country skiing in 1998, we had intellectual disability classification in cross-country skiing, in those Paralympic Games. So we have that. We have vision impairment is also a part of it. And I'm not going to list off all the different names, because those are also going to be very confusing for folks. But for folks to understand that classification is a key part of the Paralympic sport environment, and it creates a level of fairness and a level of opportunity for people to compete at higher and higher levels. And I think that right there, beyond that, you have to have a permanent disability to participate in Paralympic sport. It can't be a temporary one. It has to be a permanent disability. So I think I'll leave it right there. And I will ask our audience and everyone beyond, go to the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee website, and look at that whole list. Get yourself familiar, really look around the website. You're going to learn a lot about things that you probably never thought about.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. David, Candace mentioned lexicon. And it's lexi.global website. And preparing for this, I poked around, and it's really helps clarify and solidify what the classifications are. And so, David, if you could just explain why it's such a powerful tool, what it is, and why is it important to understanding para-athlete classification?
Yeah, I mean, Candace is absolutely right. Classification is what enables fair competition. It enables a level playing field. There's always going to be boundaries to classification, but it's absolutely vital. But one of the things we found in 2012 is that we needed to get this across to the general public, because you can't expect people to understand, field versus track versus swimming pool versus cycling track and all the other sports there are. And then you've got the various cerebral palsy, amputee, visual impairment, intellectual impairment, all these different things. So the way that what Lexi did, and I encourage you to go and have a look at it, is it really depicted this in color, and it used various different colors to reflect the particular impairment that was included in this class. And of course, in some classes, it can be varying impairments, but they amount to an equal playing field. And I was very fortunate that the founder of this, Giles Long recently produced me a tactile version of it, which was a really clever piece of work, actually. So for me, it was the first time that I'd ever looked at it and gone, wow, that, you know. And for me, rather than colors, he used the roughness of the surface to sort of depict the various limbs and other things that were important in this particular classification category. So, yeah, as Candace said, this is the absolute lifeblood of Paralympic sport, to ensure fair competition and ensure that, you know, when a race is run or wheeled, or you kind of know you're having a fair competition on the field of play. And of course, that's backed up by a huge amount of medical input and formal classification processes to make sure the integrity of the sport is maintained. So really important, but with the complication comes a need to simplify, and Lexi certainly seeks to do that for the average member of the public who just wants to know more about how the sport's played.
Great, thanks for the explanation. So Candace, I want to move on, shift gears a little bit. In 2008, the United Nations created the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 30. Please explain the significance of how the Paralympic movement has been impacted by this global initiative.
Oh, thanks, Sean. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is the very first human rights document to include disabled people. And that didn't come up for signing until 2008. You know, so if you think about it, disabled people weren't considered human before 2008. It's just really a lot, those kind of ideas. I know it's making it sound a little extreme, but it is absolutely true that before that time, we were really just thought of kind of a condition. And the Millennium Development Goals were being created, and the delegation from Mexico said, hey, there's nothing about disabled people in here. And then all of a sudden they realized, oh, there is no human rights document. So this document has 50 articles in it. And one of the articles that really stands out, I think all of them really stand out for everyone, because this human rights document is the most comprehensive human rights document written to this day, because it really includes everyone now. Everyone's included this, because if we really want to be honest with ourselves, if we live a long, blessed life, we will experience disability. Everyone will experience disability at some point in their lives. And so the protection of laws, the protections of treaties, those kind of things are really important. And the CRPD, or the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is one of those documents that is critical for us to keep in mind in all aspects. And sport is one place. And they included sport in it, as you mentioned, Article 30, which speaks about the right to recreation, leisure, sport, and culture, to participate in culture. And sport is also about culture. And so it's a massive piece that gives validation to a group of people to participate in a major way. And the International Paralympic Committee started to pay attention to the CRPD. I think it was right around 2014, I think was the first wall that they put up at the Sochi Paralympic Games that had to do with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to really recognize it. And they had athletes sign it. And so now the International Paralympic Committee has created a campaign called We the 15 out of that recognition of the CRPD. And We the 15 is about recognizing that at least 15% of the people in the global world identify as having a disability. And I use the word identify as having a disability because many, many people who have disabilities will not self-identify for fear of discrimination and exclusion, and that they won't get their needs met. And so this is a major shift. You know, the paradigm shift we heard of 2012 with Paralympic sport was massive. The inclusion of We the 15 campaign that was launched in Tokyo is another level up for us. And I think that the opportunity may come forward again for the United States to actually ratify this CRPD. The United States hasn't ratified this CRPD. Over 185 countries globally have ratified, but the United States has not ratified the CRPD. And it's critical for us to be able to be a part of that and have a voice in it. And so all of these pieces come together to celebrate and to support this beautiful thing that we all love so much, sport.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, we're talking a lot about awareness. And David, I'd like you just to speak to the importance of making sure that the children around the world are exposed to the Paralympic movement. Why is this so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, again, look, I'm gonna talk about 2012, and just to put that in context for the audience, we actually, in many ways, don't want to be talking about 2012 anymore. And we will come on to it, John, I know, but we want to be talking about Paris 2024 and the bar was raised. We want to be talking about LA and how the bar was raised again. But 2012 did lots of amazing things. And one of the most incredible things it did in the UK was it reached 2 million kids. 2 million kids across 8,000 schools got to participate in Paralympic sport. And I remember I had the privilege of going along with someone who LA particularly knows very well, David Beckham, to present the prize to the winning school. And it was the chief executive of one of our major supermarkets in the UK that was presenting this prize. And you know what? They had done such an amazing job of bringing like 10 or 12 athletes to the kids' attention and teaching them about the social model of disability and getting them to play Paralympic football, Paralympic table tennis, all sorts of different sports. And so the chief executive said, it's an amazing occasion today, kids. You've won this prize. And there's a very famous David who's come along to see you as a result. And of course, he was referring to David Beck. And he said, do you know who it is? And one of the kids in the school put their hand up and said, is it David Clarke, the blind footballer? And for me, that was, I mean, a little bit of self-reflection required there, but that was just an amazing moment where these kids had gone through the understanding and all about what was going on. And the fact that one of the kids just thought it would be a Paralympian who was the amazing person landing in the school that day and not an amazing professional footballer was just brilliant. And, I've coached mainstream football for 16 years myself as a blind person, and kids are just brilliant. They're absolute sponges, and they ask you lots of questions. But once they got their questions out of the way, if you're a good coach, they don't see disability. If you're a good teacher, if you're helping them on their way, they just see you. And for me, giving kids access to this stuff and bringing them up with that understanding is so powerful. And it teaches them so much about adaptability, innovation, reaction to change, resilience, all those kind of things. And the challenge we have in the UK now is it was so successful in 2012 that my challenge, particularly as a CEO of British Paralympic Association, is to say, right, how do we now infuse that next generation of kids? And we're finding ways of doing it here through programs we're doing with the BBC and the Premier League around kids TV. We're also doing some Get Set stuff, Path to Paris in schools, alongside more information about the social model of disability and getting kids to understand that it's the way society's built that affects a disabled person's life, not the disability itself. But the other thing that we need to look at is how many disabled kids are not participating in sport. And I can tell you in the UK, it's only 25% of disabled kids are actually participating regularly in sport at school. So there's two sides to this, John. The first thing is that kids are our future leaders. They're our future thought leaders. They're our future business leaders. They're our future community leaders. And it's really important they have a super positive approach to disability and inclusion. But also we need to think of those disabled kids who are currently in what you might call the system and how we make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to do sport.
Wow, fantastic. Well, I'm gonna continue. I'll ask you a follow-up, David. Talking about Paris specifically, as we're moving from backward focus on 2012 to forward focus toward Paris. Tell us about the preparations that you are working on at the British Paralympic Association, and explain some of the challenges that you and your team are specifically addressing as the days are really counting down as we approach Paris.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so on Monday, we celebrated 100 days to go. Anyone who's familiar with the centre of London, we have these massive billboards at Piccadilly Circus right in the centre of London. And we had our athletes all across these billboards with 100 days to go messaging. And it was really, really exciting. For me as a CEO, though, it gets a bit operationally focused now, right? This is a project whose date is not moving. So, whatever you've been involved with in the past, the 28th of August will be the opening ceremony of the Paralympics, and we will have some brilliant sport from the 29th to the 8th of September. And then we'll all come home with amazing memories and amazing legacies on the 9th of September. But for us, it's about creating the conditions for that our athletes and our team are best prepared. So that means having the right team wrapped around our athletes in terms of our team development program, making sure that everything they're going to need to produce their best when it matters is available. And that's about being environment ready. So understanding the surroundings, understanding the village, understanding the facilities, and having a really unrivaled knowledge of the environment at which the games are going to be happening. And as I say, building those support services around those athletes to enable them to be at their elite best at the moment that matters. But the other side of our work, as well as the best prepared in our sort of mission to, through sport, inspire a better world for disabled people, is what we do with that gold dust, what we do with that currency. As Sophie said, winning those medals is one thing, but what happens as a result of them? And so for us, we've also been conducting a lot of social impact programs in Paris itself, reaching out to schools, universities, business schools, businesses. And our home from home during the Paralympics is a little suburb of Paris called Clichy. And it's been brilliant to work with that area of the city on accessibility around hotels, on businesses being accessible to disabled people, both from a customer and an employee point of view, and really sort of creating this home from home feel where, we can't insist they support the British team first, but we certainly want them to support the British team second. And Candace, you'll remember when we came to LA, we said, we really want the British team to be your second favorite in LA and across Southern California and across the US. But as the birthplace of the Paralympic Games and the wonderful work Dr. Ludwig Guttmann did to create this incredible movement that's just really gone from strength to strength and just celebrated its 75th anniversary, we feel it's really incumbent on us not just to take the sport, but the power of the sport, what we do with the sport, what we do to change society. And you'll have seen a lot of press this week about things that aren't, the Paris Metro and I have to acknowledge that it's not the most accessible, it's not the most accessible metro in the world. But if you look at what the organizing committee have done across the games themselves, we're looking at the most accessible Paralympic village ever. We're looking at one of the most environmentally sustainable, if not the most environmentally sustainable games ever. And what I hope it does is what happened in London. When we talk about spreading this gold dust, is how does it make French society feel? What does it do with decision makers? What kind of thoughts do they have? Yes, some of these old cities like London and Paris, you can't change them overnight. But what impetus can we have to ensure that everyone is included? And I'm minded of that cartoon with the snow on the steps and the ramp, and you've got the janitor of the school clearing the snow off the steps, and the guy in the wheelchair saying, you know what, if you cleared the snow off the ramp, everyone can get into school. And it's such a powerful thing. So for me, yes, we are wanting our most successful performance ever. We're very, very fortunate that it's on our doorstep. It's just across the channel. It's in our time zone. We haven't got COVID, so we can have supporters, and surprise, surprise, the most tickets sold to any nation for the Paralympics is the UK. But it's really important we do something with it. And we don't just do something with it during the games, we do something with it before and after the games. And That's what we're doing in Paris, but that's also why we've been out to LA, to talk to the people, to talk to some of the people involved in disability sport, to talk to the city council, to talk to all sorts of different stakeholders, to say, okay, how can we help? Because for us, this goes far beyond sport. We have a corporate program here called Beyond the Podium, and I think it's a brilliant title, because we of course have to create those performances, because without those gold medal winning performances, we don't get the airtime, we don't get the space to speak. But once we do, we must focus beyond the podium and how we change society so that disabled people can live a full and happy life like anyone else.
Wow.
Right? Totally blessed, right? To have this man in this space right now. Oh my gosh, David, I just have to, reiterate John's wow, because that really is what, and it makes me emotional thinking about it right now, what disabled people want. That's what we want, is it to take it beyond that entertainment space.
Yeah.
And that inspiration porn, right?
Yeah.
Of just like, oh, isn't it? Oh, it's so inspirational. Disabled people can do it, kind of thing. It's the next level of, we're all human beings that deserve a right to have and choose what opportunities we want to participate in. And if we cannot get those opportunities to choose, like to actually choose, not someone go, oh, here's this for you, you're over here, but actually say, okay, here's all the opportunities, now you get to choose which one you want to do. Because non-disabled people do that all the time. And so the way you said that, I'm so glad this is being recorded, because I'm going to listen to it over and over. Thank you.
And I think, just quickly, John, I think, certainly, I think here in the UK, we've got really comfortable with the idea that disabled people can perform at an elite level on the field of play, on the running track, in the swimming pool, in the velodrome, in the tennis court. And I think the challenge for us now is to take that and say, okay, if you can get comfortable with that, and let's face it, it differs around the world as to how much comfort we've even got with that. But if you can get comfortable with that, how about disabled people being elite in the classroom, in the workplace, in the health setting, in society? And for me, it's kind of step by step. But as Candace says, and she knows more than most, having traveled the world and done so much in Paralympic sport, this is a journey, but we're getting very impatient on that journey, because the time is now.
Well,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Candace, I'm gonna ask you, as we look forward to LA 2028. I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but looking ahead to LA 2028, I know that you're going to be also closely watching Paris and gleaning the lessons from that experience to deliver a successful and inclusive and popular Paralympic Games here in Los Angeles. But do you believe that the Paralympic movement currently is heading in the right direction here in the US? And what can we do to make sure that it is heading in the right direction by LA 28?
Thank you, John, for that question. And David, I will be as positive as possible. I know how much you love positivity. But in the United States, we are behind. And the Brits really do have wonderful programs that we can look at and learn from, and then build our own, what they are. But we don't have any type of programs like David was talking about coming out of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. We see what's happening as just a commitment to try to mirror Paralympic athletes as Olympic athletes. And we're athletes, definitely, but we are not the same, and our needs are not the same. And in the last in Tokyo, the last games, we we saw a Paralympic athlete, a woman, not participate, to pull herself out because they would not allow her attendant to come and be a part of the games. And we have to understand the dynamics of disability and what the needs are and how we are able to then accommodate those needs. And the Americans with Disabilities Act, one of the things that is written into Title II is something called collective responsibility. And we have a collective responsibility as a people here in the United States to know and understand what the needs are for disabled people, and then also for our athletes with disabilities, and be able to fulfill those. And so what we have been seeing is a real slow movement forward of inclusion. In 2001, the U.S. Olympic Committee, of which they were called at the time, incorporated U.S. Paralympics into their programming, and they started to be the national governing body for several Paralympic sports. The U.S. Olympic Committee didn't change their name until 2019. So yeah, it is very slow. And as David said, we're getting really impatient. And so to hear the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and hear people articulate the U.S. Olympians and Paralympians, or that the Olympics and the Paralympics are coming to Los Angeles, is essential. Like, we really do have to say that so that we can create that shift and change that David's talking about, and that systemic piece that creates opportunities for everyone. And here in the United States, we've been really slow to move in that direction. And we often hear, oh, we see something and it says, the Olympics are coming to Los Angeles. It's like, well, the Paralympics are coming here too. I mean, this will be the second opportunity that LA, and I love that David reminded me of this, the second opportunity for LA to put on the Paralympic Games. They didn't do it in 1984. So now in 2028, we have this next opportunity. And what will we do with it? Will there be not just sport entertainment, which is fabulous and awesome to get us all motivated by, but will there be this opportunity that is there but not being taken advantage of, to really market the Paralympic Games as a way to create real, and I'm going to say it again, systemic change, because we focus in this country on the nonprofit industrial complex to support a lot of organizations. And there isn't a lot of federal funding that goes into things in the United States, which makes us very different from the way other countries put on the games. And in that thought process, there's a very strong mindset of scarcity, that there's not enough. And so we only can do so much. But the truth is that there's plenty. And what we have to do is we have to innovate and think outside the box. And one of the things about disability, and one of the things about Paralympic sport, is that it's a disruptor. It disrupts things. It requires us to change the way we're doing things. And if we continue to market the Paralympics the way we market the Olympics, we're missing multiple opportunities to really build a legacy and a narrative that will last beyond all of us. And that's what the hope is here in not just Los Angeles, but in the country, is that from our national governing body, the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, we actually see programs like David was talking about that they have happening, and that here locally in Los Angeles, we don't just look at the legacy of the Paralympic Games as some more sport in the area, but we look at it above and beyond that, that there is access, there's inclusion, and there's a real revolution, I think, in the way we think about making sure that each of us participates. And it doesn't have anything to do with empathy. From my perspective, it has to do with compassion, because I really do not want people to know how difficult things are. I want them to know that it needs to be changed. And a compassionate stance is one that says we need to do something. It's an action. Empathy is just kind of, a feeling. It's like, oh, that's rough. It's like, yeah, no, I want you to move. I want you and I want us to move together. And so with the last part of that, I would say, I want to see, and we disabled people want to see us is part of everything from the beginning to the end. And if we think of Paralympics when we are building out programs, if we think of disability when we build out programs, we're making sure it's inclusive. Like, we really are, because if we do the traditional model of building the games from the Olympic perspective, we're going to miss a lot of opportunities to be able to elevate this to the next level and create that, paradigm shift that we want to be able to see in the world as human beings, right? Because this is about us. It's about human beings being whatever we want to be.
Well, this is a great theme to wrap up the panel discussion. But I want to ask one quick question, and I'll ask the same question to both you and David and Candace. What can Pacific Council members specifically do to elevate and improve the Paralympic movement? David, you first.
Oh, that's very kind. Well, a great start is joining us here today, because you've come to find out. So thank you for doing that. Get involved. Keep an open mind. Whenever you say Olympics, say Paralympics straight afterwards. And wherever you look in life, in whichever part of your life you're in, think, can everyone do this? Is this open to everybody? Who's not in the room? And quite often, I'm afraid, you will currently find that it's people like Candace and me who aren't going to be in the room or who can't do it. And I hope it's not too disingenuous to say that disability is a characteristic, in fact, perhaps the only characteristic that can happen to all of us. And I think people often think about it as something that only happens to other people until it happens to them. Today, we have a member of Parliament who's come back to Parliament today in the UK, who developed sepsis and has as a result lost both his feet and both his hands. This can happen to anybody, and therefore, why not build a world that everyone can participate in? And just put it into really simple terms. Imagine arriving at your office today and someone had taken the staircases away and the elevator's not working. What are you going to do? Well, you're probably going to have to just turn around and go somewhere else. And so for me, it's get involved, be vocal, be an ally, be an advocate, and most of all, show up. When this happens, we're going to have lots of events and practice events, and you know what? LA is an incredible sporting city. It's an incredible theatrical and film area, right? If anyone can do this, brilliantly, it's LA. And what more impetus than to know that the last time it happened, you kind of didn't. So for me, show up, get involved, be an ally, be an advocate, and let's make 2028 one of the most incredible experiences of our lives.
Beautifully said.
I would say all of that, and I would say educate yourself. Get on these websites, check this out, check out the Brits website, check out, USOPC's website, check out the IPC website. I would like to ask a couple of things. One, encourage other people to join the Pacific Council because it's just like there's so many great things to learn about, but they have gone forward and said, we really want to get involved with this. We want to be a part of what's coming to Los Angeles, and we want to know everything there is to know. And I would ask all of you and everyone here today and everyone's listening and, in recording is, I wanted you to watch the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games, the Paris 2024 Games with discernment. I want you to watch, how is NBC broadcasting the Olympic Games different from the Paralympic Games? How are they different? Where can we see them? How often can I see them? What is this? What is that? The Today Show, is an NBC sponsor. Probably 9 times out of 10, I see the little peacock in the corner with the rings, but I don't see the aguitos, which are the symbols for the Paralympics, but they're going to be broadcasting both. And so how is it different? And why is it different? And ask those questions, and then ask the questions of yourself of what type of bias do you have? Because we all have bias. I was injured in 1975, as I said, with a spinal cord injury at the age of 21. And I had major bias about disabled people. In fact, I kept saying to myself, I'm not like them. I am not like those people. And yeah, well, yes, I am. Yes, I am. It's because I had this societal overlay bias that was pushed down on me once I was using a wheelchair, and I had a very apparent disability. Somebody, you could see me moving around in a wheelchair, something's going on. So that's what I would ask, is just question that and do that with grace and kindness for yourself and compassion, because it's a process. We have to take these layers off as a process, and we all have them. And so be kind to yourself as you're doing it, because we're all here to be successful. I want you to be successful. And I am cheering everyone on. Even if I don't like what you're doing, I'm still cheering you on that you're going to do it better. So those are the things that I would offer. And finally, I would say, always include disabled people, hire disabled people. David mentioned that earlier too, because we are here and we have a lot to offer. And we have a lot of opportunities to really grow as human beings and create more collective liberation for everyone.
Fantastic. We have a few minutes left, and we have some questions from the attendees. So I'll get to the first question here. It's from John Neighbor, someone who we're all very familiar with. Our very own
David might not know John.
John Neighbor, 4 gold medals from 76 and board of directors for the USOPC, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, he asked a question of you, Candace. What can be done to create increased desire to watch Paralympic events outside of the Paralympics?
What can be done to increase that desire? Well, see us more in advertisements. And I think that's my first kind of answer to that just off the top of my head is that the more we're seeing, the more we're wanted in spaces. One of the things, when I had my spinal cord injury in 1970, I never had seen anyone with a disability before. I just had never seen that. And once I got out of the hospital after 6 months in rehabilitation, I was the only person there. And I am still often the only person in the room with an apparent disability. And so I think that if companies and organizations really made sure that their visuals, their marketing information had images of disabled people in it, that people would be excited to learn more and gain more opportunities to be around disabled people. When I think about Paralympic sport, well, for all of us, you know, and David said it, to say Olympic and Paralympic, and or say the games, you know, talk about it, learn about it, you know, bring it up. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Can I just also add to that, if I may, that I'm not going to use a Paralympic example. I'm going to use a women's football example, or women's soccer, given what the audience I'm talking to. The sports personality of the year last year in the UK was the England women's soccer goalkeeper. Now, that is utterly unthinkable even 3 years ago. 5, 10, not in a million years. But last year it happened. Why did it happen? Because the exposure, the endorsements, the TV coverage, the articles written, the scale of the tournaments, how they're organized, how the events are organized. And we had some brilliant examples in the UK last year with the cycling in Scotland, which was a fully integrated event with a mixed program and properly mixed in, not just separated out into sessions, but properly mixed in. And you know, if you produce stuff and present stuff in the right way, people will come. In my experience, Paralympic sport is often downgraded, and therefore the attendance is downgraded. And the final thing I would say is, do not give the tickets away. They have a value.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, yeah. And the inclusion of you know, disabled people in the process of building it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
We have another question from Nora Fisher Onar. She does mention that to thank you for being here and speaking on these key concepts, but she's asking Candace, you mentioned that sport has the power to create systemic societal change, and she is writing, Nora is writing a master's thesis on about how sport and sustainability and how sport can and should play a role in changing the future of our planet. Yes, indeed. What, in your opinion, are the major roadblocks at any level for creating systemic change that you are envisioning?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you. And boy, I'd love to explore it more or with her. And I'm going to also say that David needs to answer this too, so for me, I think the first thing I would say is one of the roadblocks is that we're really attached to the status quo, that we as human beings don't like change for some reason, but that is what we do. We change all the time. And we oftentimes don't want to include something that we're not used to seeing or being around, which is part of our makeup of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn in our parasympathetic nervous system is that when we're faced with something unfamiliar, we actually push back on it. And I think that's a barrier for us. And we have to discover ways to get past that. And one of the ways to get past that is to spend time with people that aren't like us, to do things that we've never done before, to feel the resistance of it's oh, I don't want to do that. But it's like, oh, that is the thing you should do, you know? And so those are a couple of things that I would come up with. I'm going to think about this even more. David?
Well, actually, yeah. We have one more question that's specifically for you, and it's from an anonymous guest. David, you mentioned that host countries, that the host countries are increasing their accessibility during the games, but have non-host countries ever used the event, the Paralympics, to push more protections and rights for disabled people in the past that you know about?
I think that's happening. You see, people might find this difficult to understand, but you know, as the chief executive of British Paralympic Association and Paralympics GB, which is kind of our games brand, I want two things to happen. I want our team to be the most successful it can ever be. But actually, in many ways, more importantly, I want the movement to move forward. You know, I think, you know, before 2008, China had absolutely zero interest or involvement in Paralympic sport. Having had 2008 in Beijing, they're now the world leader. It's seen as a source of pride, and the change that's happened in that society around disability and Paralympic sport is pretty phenomenal. So it's not directly answering the question, but there's no doubt that hosting the games is a huge impetus, and I'm very conscious that USOPC people may be on this call, so I'll be very careful with what I say. But as a Brit responsible for the British team, the US has a massive amount of potential and just hasn't, you know, it achieves amazing things on the world stage. But given the size of the nation and the resources, my goodness, the US could have an impact similar to China. And I really hope it does. And I'm almost defeating myself by saying that, but I genuinely hope it does, because, you know, wherever we're talking about, wherever the games has been, look at Brazil, you know, post Rio, the Brazilian Paralympic squads are huge. The talent is incredible. The world leading performances are incredible. So maybe not being influenced, although I would say that probably did happen in Europe because of the proximity of our nations to each other. And Europe had often gone along the sort of medical model of disability as opposed to the social model of disability. So perhaps you could argue in Europe, because of proximity, that's happened. And it would be wrong of me not to mention Japan as well. You know, again, absolute game changer, remarkable results in the Asian Paralympic Games, all as a result of being a host. So I think there's definitely a correlation here between hosting and on-field performances and attitudes off the field improving. And I actually see that as the real opportunity for LA. As I say, you know, in some ways it's against my job to welcome more competition, but that's not what happens in Paralympic movement. In the Paralympic movement, we embrace competition because it means that everyone's getting better and everyone's having more of an impact and everyone's creating more of that gold dust and that currency to spread around and change things. So yeah, not necessarily as an adjacent benefit, but there's definitely a huge benefit to being a host.
Fantastic. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I could ask you, I could continue on this conversation long after the hour. Thank you so much for all of your insightful questions. I want to thank you, Candace, for all of your candor and insight, and David also for your thoughts today about sports diplomacy and the Paralympics from Paris 2024 to Los Angeles in 2028. Thank you. Great job. It's been an honor for me, and we will see each other soon, I hope.